buckle up for a hilarious journey through automotive history's most spectacular failures. The 1950s, an era of rockabilly, atomic optimism, and cars that were more comedy than transportation. While some vehicles became legends, others became infamous for reasons that will make you laugh, cringe, and question the sanity of mid-century automotive designers. From nuclear-powered pipe dreams to cars that looked like they were assembled by a drunk engineer, we're diving into the 10 most spectacular automotive blunders that prove not every idea that rolls off the assembly line is a winner. The Chrysler Imperial had everything it needed to be a contender for the title of luxury car of the 1950s, except, well, quality control. This massive land yacht was known for its innovative features, including a push-button transmission. Sounds futuristic, right? But unfortunately, the execution left a lot to be desired. Let's start with that push-button transmission. Instead of a traditional gear shift, the Imperial had buttons on the dashboard to change gears. Great idea in theory, but these buttons frequently malfunctioned, leaving drivers stranded with a car stuck in gear. That's not exactly the futuristic experience Chrysler was hoping for. And let's not forget the constant electrical problems. After all, nothing says luxury like a car that randomly shuts down because of faulty wiring. Performance? Well, it wasn't much better. Despite its powerful engine, the Chrysler Imperial's suspension system couldn't handle the weight of its massive frame, which meant a rough, bumpy ride for all involved. At the end of the day, it's safe to say that while the Chrysler Imperial had some forward-thinking ideas, the execution made it a car ahead of its time in all the wrong ways. Great. Let's dive into car number 9. The Ford Edsel. This car is infamous for being one of the biggest commercial flops in automotive history. Dubbed the car of the future, the Edsel was Ford's attempt to create a mid-tier brand that would sit between Ford and Mercury. Spoiler alert, it didn't quite go as planned. Let's start with the design. The Edsel's signature horse collar grille earned it the nickname, an Oldsmobile sucking a lemon. Yes, that's a real critique. People couldn't figure out whether it was futuristic, ugly, or just plain confusing. Spoiler, it was mostly ugly. Mechanically, the Edsel wasn't much better. The Teletouch transmission, which placed gear selectors in the middle of the steering wheel, caused endless headaches. Drivers often shifted gears by mistake while trying to honk the horn. Imagine that happening in the middle of traffic. Chaos. And reliability? Forget it. The Edsel had countless issues, from faulty brakes to overheating engines, leaving its owners stranded more often than not. What really sealed the Edsel's fate, though, was its timing. Introduced during a recession, its steep price tag was enough to drive buyers straight to the competition. In just 3 years, Ford pulled the plug, and the Edsel became the butt of jokes for decades to come. Fantastic. Let's keep rolling with car number 8. The Nash Airflight was supposed to be a marvel of aerodynamics, but instead it looked like someone decided to drive around in a boiled egg. Designers tried to embrace streamlining, but they might have streamlined away anything resembling good taste. The Airflight's biggest flaw? Its looks. With its bulbous, curved body and tiny windows, the car resembled a spaceship, if spaceships were designed by people who had never actually seen a spaceship. And while the design was meant to improve fuel efficiency, it came at the cost of practicality. Those windows, too small to provide a good view of the road. The trunk, barely big enough to hold a suitcase. It was form over function in the worst possible way. And let's not forget the infamous Weather Eye climate control system. This feature, which was supposed to regulate the car's temperature, was more of a guessing game control system. It either blasted you with hot air in summer or left you freezing in winter. There was no middle ground, just like the opinions on the Airflight. People either hated it or really hated it. Despite its flaws, Nash tried to market the Airflight as a futuristic, family-friendly car. But between the odd design choices and mechanical issues, sales never really took off, and the Airflight quietly fizzled out by the mid-1950s. The Chevrolet 150 utility sedan wasn't just bad, it was a blatant exercise in corner cutting. This car was marketed as a no-frills, budget-friendly option for businesses and families. But Chevy took no frills to a whole new level by essentially stripping the car down to its bare bones. Think of it as the dollar store version of a Chevy. For starters, the interior was practically non-existent. No radio, no clock, and not even a dome light. Just you, a steering wheel, and the crushing silence of your poor life choices. The upholstery? A bare-bones vinyl that felt more like sitting on a picnic table than a car seat. At least you didn't have to worry about spilling your coffee. It was too uncomfortable to drink in the car anyway. Then there was the engine. Sure, it got you from point A to point B, but don't expect anything exciting along the way. With its underpowered inline-six engine, this car was about as thrilling as watching paint dry. And the handling? Let's just say taking corners felt more like piloting a boat than driving a car. While some buyers appreciated the low price, most quickly realized that the 150 utility sedan was cheap for a reason. It lacked personality, comfort, and frankly, pride. Chevy quietly retired the model, and it became a relic of an era when minimalism in cars wasn't exactly a good thing. The Cadillac El Dorado Brougham was meant to be the pinnacle of luxury in the late 1950s. And it was, if you consider luxury to mean sky-high prices paired with sky-high repair bills. This car cost a jaw-dropping $13,000 at launch, more than many houses at the time. But what did buyers get for that small fortune? A car that was more temperamental diva than luxury masterpiece. First, let's talk about its infamous air suspension. Cadillac claimed it would deliver a cloud-like ride, but in reality, it was more like a pogo stick. The system was prone to leaks and failures, which left the car literally dragging its belly on the ground. Nothing says prestige like bottoming out at a red light. Then there were the electrical features, like the automatic trunk closer. It sounds fancy, until it decided to close halfway and refused to budge. And don't get me started on the memory seats, which had a knack for forgetting your settings entirely. A luxury car that ignores you? Rude. At the end of the day, the El Dorado Brougham was a case of ambition exceeding execution. It was beautiful, sure, but owning one meant constant trips to the repair shop and a bank account that cried itself to sleep. Cadillac soon realized this wasn't sustainable and discontinued the model after a few years. The Kaiser Darren was an ambitious attempt to combine style and innovation in the 1950s sports car market. But instead of speeding ahead, it stalled on the starting line, quite literally in some cases. This car is often remembered more for its peculiarities than its performance. Let's start with the sliding doors, arguably the Darren's most infamous feature. These doors didn't open outward. Instead, they slid forward into the front fenders. Sounds cool, right? Except they were incredibly prone to jamming. Many unlucky drivers found themselves either trapped inside or unable to get in at all. That's not exactly what you want in a weekend cruiser. And then there was the fiberglass body. While innovative for its time, it wasn't exactly built to last. The panels often cracked under stress, and let's just say the fit and finish weren't exactly showroom quality. You could spot the gaps between the panels from a mile away. Performance-wise, the Darren was a letdown. Its tiny 90-horsepower engine made it sluggish compared to competitors like the Chevrolet Corvette. But hey, at least it had a fancy 3-position convertible top, though that too was notoriously finicky. The Kaiser Darren ended production after just 1 year, leaving behind a legacy of quirky design choices and unmet potential. Today, it's more of a collector's curiosity than a car anyone would actually want to drive regularly. The Dodge La Femme was Dodge's attempt to create a car designed by women for women. A sweet idea in theory, but in practice, it was a marketing disaster wrapped in pastel paint. Instead of addressing real automotive needs for women drivers, Dodge assumed the key to success was accessorizing. The La Femme came in soft pink and white hues, complete with a matching raincoat, umbrella, and handbag. Yes, Dodge included fashion accessories with the car. But here's the catch. The handbag was too small to hold anything useful, and the raincoat, made of flimsy material that barely survived a drizzle. It's like the car was more concerned with being a Barbie accessory than a functional vehicle. Mechanically, the La Femme was just a rebranded Dodge Custom Royal Lancer. It offered nothing new under the hood, and the standard V8 engine wasn't even tailored for the La Femme's supposed audience. If anything, it ran the risk of alienating both men and women, one for its pink frills and the other for its lack of meaningful innovation. Predictably, sales were abysmal. Women weren't impressed with being pandered to, and men didn't want to be caught dead driving one. The La Femme was quietly retired after 2 years, proving once again that bad marketing can doom even a decent car. The Packard Hawk is a tragic tale of a once proud brand's desperate attempt to stay relevant and failing spectacularly. By 1958, Packard was on life support, and the Hawk was supposed to be the lifeline that saved it. Instead, it became a glaring example of why throwing fins on everything wasn't always a good idea. Let's talk design. The Packard Hawk looked like someone grafted a spaceship onto the front of a luxury sedan. Its oversized, gaping grille was so aggressive, it looked like it was ready to eat smaller cars on the road. And those rear fins, they weren't just tacky, they were downright cartoonish. Critics at the time described it as a nightmare in chrome, which is both hilarious and painfully accurate. Mechanically, the Hawk was plagued with problems. The supercharged V8 engine was powerful, but reliability issues kept it from being a serious competitor. And despite its sporty intentions, the Hawk handled more like a boat than a car. Taking sharp turns in this thing wasn't just tricky, it was borderline terrifying. Packard poured all its remaining resources into the Hawk, but it was too little, too late. The car flopped, and Packard folded soon after. Today, the Hawk serves as a cautionary tale of what happens when a car tries to be everything for everyone and ends up being nothing for anyone. The Studebaker Scotsman was all about affordability, but in achieving its budget-friendly goals, it forgot something important: dignity. This car wasn't just stripped down, it was downright skeletal. If cars could be embarrassed about their appearance, the Scotsman would have blushed every time it left the driveway. Let's start with the aesthetics. The Scotsman came with painted bumpers instead of chrome, which not only looked cheap but rusted faster than a wet tin can. Hubcaps? Who needs those when you've got bare steel wheels? And don't expect luxury trims. The dashboard was so bare, it made an Etch-a-Sketch look high-tech by comparison. Under the hood, things weren't much better. Its six-cylinder engine was as basic as they came, offering just enough horsepower to get you to the grocery store, if you didn't mind being overtaken by bicycles along the way. But hey, at least it was easy to maintain. Mostly because there was almost nothing to maintain in the first place. The Scotsman's real pièce de résistance was its optional heater. Yes, optional. Studebaker figured comfort was a luxury item, so if you wanted to stay warm in winter, you had to pay extra. Talk about cold-hearted design. Despite, or perhaps because of its thriftiness, the Scotsman didn't last long. Buyers wanted cheap cars, sure, but not ones that looked and felt like punishment. Today, it's remembered more as a punchline than a product. Okay, technically this might not be your everyday car, but it deserves its spot at the top of this list for sheer audacity and sheer failure. The 1957 Waterman Aerobbile was pitched as a flying car, which sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie. Unfortunately, it had the functionality of a paper airplane and the reliability of a wet matchstick. Let's start with the concept. A car that could transform into an aircraft. Sounds amazing, right? But the execution was, let's say, less than stellar. The Aerobbile looked like a box on wheels with wings slapped onto it as an afterthought. On the ground, it was slow, clunky, and hard to maneuver. In the air, it wasn't much better. With a top speed of just 100 miles per hour and a takeoff process that made pilots question their life choices, the Aerobbile was neither a good car nor a good plane. Safety? Non-existent. The Aerobile's engineering was so questionable that even its inventor, Moulton Taylor, admitted it was more of a proof of concept than a practical vehicle. Translation: please don't actually drive or fly this thing. The Aerobbile failed to gain any commercial traction, which is probably for the best. It lives on as a reminder that not every futuristic idea is ready for the present. Sometimes you're better off sticking to the ground, or at least designing a car that doesn't look like a flying refrigerator. From cars that look like they were designed by cartoonists to vehicles that were more liability than luxury, these 1950s automotive disasters prove that innovation is a wild, unpredictable beast. These aren't just mechanical mistakes. They're a hilarious testament to human creativity, ambition, and occasional complete confusion. Car enthusiasts, comedy lovers, and anyone who appreciates a good automotive roast, which of these mechanical monstrosities takes the cake for you? Cast your vote in the comments, And let's celebrate the magnificent failures that make automotive history so incredibly entertaining.